What the psychologists say was wrong with Lecter?
Psychologists call him a psychopath. They don't know what else to call him.
Even though I may be tough, I'm often scared of what I can feel, so I take my cues for response from people around me. I also have such a wild imagination that I'm fully capable of freaking myself out, which I've owned up to in other posts. What happened here scared the holy crap out of me, but I did not allow myself to acknowledge out loud whatever it was at the moment. I very strongly believe in intention and try not to give in to negative energy. Sort of the awake version of putting one's head under the covers, hoping it goes away when a monster crawls out from under the bed. There's nothing about this story that I can prove to myself by what other people saw or experienced with me, but it terrifies me to the worst to this day. I couldn't sleep last night thinking of it, still scared. The location and names I will keep for privacy. I hope I make sense explaining it to you. I was already grown up when my parents moved to a tiny desert base town in Utah, and this story is embarrassing because I was too scared to act or respond. My mom was the school librarian for 23 years at the little public school built in the 50s or 60s. The main building was kind of an H layout with some outside modular classrooms. The admin office, bathroom, lounge, gym, and cafeteria were all by the front, the south entrance hall on the center bar of the H. My mom's library was a couple of doors down on the outer side of the lower leg or southeast wing of the H. There were self-locking exit-only fire doors at the end of each hall, which could be used but not held open without setting off the alarms. The entire campus was demolished the year after my mom retired, and I don't know if the new school got built there. As a visitor, I always went in through the front doors to the office. I may have been in the cafeteria once, but I never really went past the hall where you go from the office around the corner to my mom's library. I'd entered a few of the classrooms on that wing and the teacher's lounge during daylight hours. I'd only visited my mom a few times during school in her little library. It had a reading dragon and a life-size statue of a beloved fictional character. I was not personally fond of this adorable statue, but my mom talked to it and dressed it for the holidays. The little kids loved it too, of course. I always felt overgrown and out of place, even in her library. One time, I was there to see my sister-in-law dressed up as Clifford the Big Red Dog for the book fair. And those were happy thoughts and happy times. I chalked up my general dislike for the building to the fact that it always stunk like grubby little children and rotted wood. Sorry to those who love kids, they do leave a stink. I disliked how the school felt, but shrugged it away. Many public schools out west are flat, plain, painted cinder-block buildings with upper inside windows along the halls. The open layout makes it so you can see into most hallways and classrooms from outside or the opposite wings. All my elementary schools had looked dismally, more or less the same. Many of them also had given me the same used, unpleasantly familiar, crowded but empty, old feeling when I was young. So, no biggie. Some schools I visited were much larger, older, and creepier in the poor rural regions of my childhood. I'm looking at you, Middleton JHS. However, I'd never been to any of these schools alone after dark. When my mom retired, I came from the West Coast to help her clean her library and trim the collection. She struggled with tossing anything, so I flew to help her close her deadline to clear out. I love my mom, and I also hoard books, but I pushed her pretty hard to save what she could and damn the rest. I have worked in used books, so I am accustomed to the heartache of discards. We filled many boxes of donations. Piles of books lined the halls outside, and we also had to pile up the trash there, as we'd been locked out trying to get to the dumpsters. The custodian was on vacation, and my mom was worried about how he would react to all the piles of trash bags and recycling in the hall when he got back. Anyway, on previous visits, I'd found the teeny-tiny stalls and tinier toilets in the student bathrooms were way too little for my large person to use. So I had avoided going in there since I had never been in the boys' side until I needed garbage bags to help my mom clean that summer day. The custodian's supply room was just inside past the doorway to the boys' side bathroom. Because I've worked as a janitor, I have a habit of announcing my femme self when entering a men's room. These restrooms had no doors and were side by side where the entrance hall met my mom's wing. opposite the staff lounge. When I first went in on the boys' side, I felt what could be the normal elementary school transgressiveness of being in the wrong bathroom, even though we were for sure the only ones there. Alas, I've spent way too much time cleaning bathrooms for there to be too much novelty in that. With each trip into the closet for supplies, my feelings grew to a more specific and very unwelcome menacing absolute of something bad watching me and lurking close by. Eventually, I just grabbed up a bunch of stuff and decided not to be in there again. This was on my first day of the trip. I felt like a ninny for being scared, even though it was a strong, involuntary physical response. That first night, we stayed until 7 or so before it got dark. Mom said she wanted to be out by 9, and I assumed that was just district policy. The next day was Friday, and we barely had time to meet the deadline. Once again, after 3 or 4, we were the only people in the whole school. I was a little out of patience with my loving mother when I discovered that, in addition to the treasures of her library, we also needed to clear out 2 large storage spaces. These unused areas were located across the hall from the bathrooms, between the teacher's lounge and office area. Leaving my mom to tearfully catalog a stack of stragglers, I set out to basically toss or recycle 20 years' worth of holiday and book fair decorations. The whole time, I was very much aware that I was not alone, and I worked as fast and as quietly as possible. I didn't want to be there in the hall or those strange cubbies after dark, no sir. The lurking feeling got stronger and more ominous. It seemed to seethe down the hall, up to the doorway of the library, coming from the bathrooms. I felt cornered in, followed and watched in the small storage areas. It was all I could do not to run away back to my mom. After a stern lecture to my coward heart, I gave up on sorting the mess and just shoveled it all into trash bags. Thus, I quickly finished the storage areas. My mom was tired and sad to leave her school, and we still had a very steep amount of cleaning and at least 3 sections of shelves to trim. We were up to our eyeballs in dust and books, working until it was dark, and only the emergency lights lit the halls. She had turned on the real lights in our part of the hall, though. The evil feeling was still there, but now worse. My mom also locked us in, once it was dark, without saying anything. I felt safe enough with her in the library, even if I felt like something was lurking near us in the empty hall. I felt very much like we were cornered by some angry, vengeful watcher. Eventually, Mom said she wanted to go home. I looked at my watch. It was only 8 p.m., and we still had an hour. So I said we should just grind on. The end of our task was in sight. We powered through and managed to catalog or trim all the relevant materials, and all that was left was to load some personal things and donations to take them away. We decided to do it the next day because the car was already full, and at least the district's to-do list was complete in time for her to turn in her keys. I do remember forcing myself to not look back as I walked to the end of the hall and the lights of the fire exit. I waited, arms full, while Mom locked her classroom door. Mom went around the corner to drop her keys to the office and then hit the hall lights off. I have never in my adult life been more afraid of the dark than in those few moments it took for my mom to come back down that very short hallway. Even now, I have huge goosebumps trying to write this. The dark shadows from the rest of the school seemed rushing to eat us both alive, and I mean to say that I could feel with every inch of my being that something, or many things, were angry and present. My mom moved slow and tired towards me. I tried to be cool and not scream. I mean, there was nothing to be seen or heard, and I felt like if I showed an inch of fear or acknowledgement, my mom and I would both be done for. My mom is a tough cookie, but her retirement and gutting her collection had her in an emotional state. I had also further upset her by throwing stuff away, which she had just found around the corner. Note, I'm not much of an actor and a worse liar, so I didn't say anything or run screaming outside. We left, checked the door behind us, and crammed into the car. Since I was also tired and I watch way too many movies, I shook off the horror show feeling. Honestly, everywhere I go in Utah has some level of scary, crappy energy. I didn't want to complain or scare my mother. I was just very glad to be done, and I didn't want to admit what a chicken I am. My mom said something about she hoped a restaurant might still be open, and I realized my watch was on Pacific time. So we had left the school around 11:30, not 9:30 like I thought. The next morning, we went back to fetch the rest of the remaining items, and school started the next week. Many of the staff were prepping their classrooms, and one of them waved and sent his teenage kid to open the fire door for us, the one we had exited the night before. Everything was too sunny and loudly fine. My mom went into his classroom, and after introductions, the kid politely offered to help me carry things to the car. My mom stayed to chat with her colleague. The boy says casually as we walked up the hall, "So you were here late last night. Did you hear the ghosts?" Trying to be cool, I was all, "No, has that happened to you?" Then this young kid tells me, all nonchalant, how he's heard ghostly children voices, that people had seen ghost figures or heard footsteps across empty halls and the empty roof of that wing for many, many years, how no one ever stays at the school alone after dark, even the janitors. I tried not to barf or cry, and he sort of smiled kindly at the look on my face and said, "Yeah, it scares my dad too, and he also said that his dad won't be here any more alone or at night, since the one night he and another teacher chased some voices that also slammed doors, but no one was really there." I felt like someone was pouring ice into my guts. Even the dusty sunlight seemed scary. I could tell he was trying to be nice by changing the subject of the conversation, and I didn't tell him what happened or how scared I had been, but he seemed to feel bad for bringing it up. Needless to say, I packed up fast and with his help made just that one last trip. Once we were both safe in the car again, I brought up to my mom what the kid had said. I told my mom how scared I was in the bathroom and the night before, and just then in broad daylight with other people there. In response, she just casually threw out how the staff had all heard and seen creepy stuff for years, especially in the tunnels, which go from that boy's bathroom under the school to the other side of the gym. She calmly said that's why she tries to be out by 9, because she knows she can't fight whatever it is, alone or after dark, since she wouldn't let it into her library. At this point, knowing that, nothing on this earth could have got me to go back in that school. My mom is very religious, so her matter-of-fact reaction surprised me. And 3 cheers to my mom, the brave little librarian who apparently educated several generations of kids, while terrible lurking nasties crept around their school. Her beloved fictional character statue got moved to the office for that last year. I like to think he helped guard my mom, and even then that very last class of students after she left. I have no idea if Mom coped with the same level of hateful, lurking, carnivorous evil energy for 20-something years, day after day, but damn! I didn't know what to say to her sitting there in the bright summer sun. I just cried a little. It was a terrible, no-good, very bad weekend, and I really hate to visit Utah. The scariest thing that ever happened to me came from the person closest to me. My ex-husband and I were both only 19 when we married. And when we first met, everything was glorious. I moved in with him and his family because me and mine were having a lot of trouble at the time, and for the first year, all was golden. Then, one day his stepdad went missing. The police found his body almost a week later, murdered. The tragedy tore through the 3 of them, Nikki, his mother, and sister, with an intensity similar to a massive hurricane. If Nikki's biological father had been present, that might have been one thing, but that piece of human excrement was not just absent, but only made the occasional appearance to steal one of the kids' Social Security checks from the mail on arrival, and that was usually when he knew no one would be home. When Fiona married Dave, he became their father, the only father they had. He became their true family. Names have been changed. After the homicide, Nikki's whole personality shifted towards darkness. He would rant and rave like a man possessed and become violent if I didn't do everything he told me to do, no matter what it was. To this day, I have scars from a physical altercation with his sister on being commanded to attack her and having no choice but to do so. The scars make me who I am now, a survivor, but I wouldn't wish what I went through on anyone. Being terrified for your life every single day and never knowing if any given moment could lead you to your last is exhausting, and traumatizing to say the least. One day, we got into it so badly that I told him I wanted a divorce. He kicked me out of my own car at my parents' house and tore out of the driveway, spraying gravel everywhere and leaving puffs of dust floating up toward the sky. I was utterly distraught by the entire situation at that point, completely at my wit's end. Yet for some reason, I still loved him, still wanted to make things work out and for us to stay together. So when he called and begged for the chance to just talk things over, of course I agreed and went outside to anxiously wait for him to return and pick me up. I expected him to have calmed down by that time he arrived. At least that's what his tone had suggested over the phone. But when I got into the car, the whole vibe felt off, chaotic. The tension was almost physically too much to handle. We rode in silence for about 5 minutes before he shot me a quick glare, then returned his attention to the road. His dark eyes drilled right through me, their anger giving off a certain glint like that of coal. "You know you're my wife, right?" he asked in a syrupy, sickly sweet voice. "That means you belong to me." I really didn't know how to respond, so I said nothing. My mind turned 1,000 miles an hour deciphering what he was telling me, though. His level of possessiveness over me had steadily increased in the past 6 months or so after Dave's death, as if he were terrified of me disappearing, along with the glue that had held his tiny little broken family together. My subconscious screamed at me that the whole thing had been a ruse, a trick to lure me back in the car, and I looked down at my hands in my lap, wringing them together until my knuckles turned red. "I thought you wanted to fix things," I said. He smirked and my gut went cold. My worst fears confirmed in that twisted, psychotic expression of his. "What do you think this is?" he replied. "It feels like a trick," I told him. He pursed his lips together, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. His shoulder tensed and his expression grew more malevolent than ever. "That's because it was a trick," he murmured. "If I can't have you, no one can." Until the moment he said those words aloud, I always thought of that expression as one you only ever hear or read in fiction. It never occurred to me that there was a reason it existed. Someone, or many others most likely, have heard that phrase and felt the sheer horror that accompanied its implication. In the course of our relationship, I endured punches, kicks, rape, 2 totaled cars, and multiple death threats. A couple of weeks after this incident, I finally managed to get away from him for good. I stayed the night at a friend's house after getting what little things I needed. She lived not far from his grandparents, but I didn't really think anything of it because the neighborhood is one of those upscale, quiet, safe kind of suburbs. We partied most of the night. She went upstairs to sleep around 1 and left me on the couch in the living room watching TV, willing myself to pass out. About an hour later, around 2 a.m., I felt like someone was watching me. I looked over at the sliding doors to my left that led out into the backyard, and there he was. He was standing outside in the dark, in the rain, watching me and crying with his fists clenched. I felt my eyes grow wide, and I sank slowly down into the leather cushions as if they would make me disappear from sight. I don't know how much longer he was there, and when I looked again he was gone. The next day, when my mom came to get me because he wrecked my car so I no longer had a ride, he was standing at the corner staring at her as she drove past. We had to get a police escort to take us straight to the station to get a restraining order. I spent the next year getting the divorce straightened out and getting the rest of my belongings that he was trying to hold hostage, like my birth certificate, diploma, and social security card. I spent the next 6 years, even after entering into a wonderful and truly loving relationship, in fear that he would come for me. Even now, 8 years later, sometimes he will still try to contact me through other people or fake accounts on social media. Sometimes the most unsuspecting person is the one you have to worry about. Sometimes all it takes is one tragedy to twist a person completely inside and turn them into a monster on the outside. This was a really long series of scary stories rolled into one, I suppose, and I apologize for any long-windedness. Those were the most horrifying experiences of my life thus far, and I hope to never have any that might equal them.